Our family first came to Wyoming in 1890, and the Meads and Hansons have worked at our ranches in Spring Gulch and Kirby ever since. In June of 2006, Brad Mead said to his wife Kate and friend David DeFazio, "Let's make bourbon," and a company and an idea were born. With a simple mission to produce Wyoming's first premium whiskey using only Wyoming ingredients and unrivaled water from a glacier-fed limestone aquifer that lies a mile below ground. We built the first legal distillery in the great state of Wyoming, featuring a custom-made still from Vendome copper and brass, and started production on a traditional bourbon from an untraditional place, a whiskey that our great state could be proud of, and would soon be recognized as America's next great bourbon, to be sipped, savored, and shared from Wyoming with the world.
For our Wyoming whiskey virtual tasting of Billy Overboard and Outrider. Right now, if you haven't already, go ahead and open up your 2 samples of Outrider and Billy Overboard. Get those into some rocks glasses so they can breathe, open up a little bit, and so you can really enjoy those when we get to that in the tasting. Joining us from Wyoming is David DeFazio, as well as Herb is joining us from Massachusetts, Jeff from Stompers, and a few other special guests, which we'll introduce later. Real quickly, David, do you mind just giving us a 40-second overview of what Wyoming whiskey is and what you do?
Sure. 40 seconds. I guess I would say this is, Wyoming whiskey was created by 3 attorneys, one of which is a 4th-generation Wyoming cattle rancher. We wanted to make a traditional bourbon in a non-traditional place. We went to the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. We found the best distiller we could possibly find in Steve Nally, who had been with Maker's Mark for 33 years, brought him out to Wyoming, sourced all of our grain and our water here in Wyoming, and using traditional techniques, started a bourbon. We set out with the goal of making America's next great bourbon on July 4th, 2009. And here we are.
I think you've done it. It's one of my favorite whiskeys, if not my favorite whiskey. So thank you for putting in that effort and time to do it. I'm going to ask you a couple questions off that I just thought of as you were talking. And I know some of these answers, but I think it's really interesting to ask the questions anyway. So you said you hired a master distiller from Maker's Mark, and Maker's Mark has a interesting way of doing their aging of barrels. They're constantly moving and agitating and rolling. So a barrel doesn't live in the same spot in a rick house the whole time. At least that's how I understand it, right? They move around, constantly moving. Is that the process that Wyoming whiskey uses, or do you have barrels that live on the bottom or live at the top or live in different spots for the whole time of their maturing process?
It's a very good question. For the first 3 years of our production, for the first 4 years of our production, we rotated our stock, just like Makers. Steve, we brought Steve in for a reason. Number one, he was an ace. He was the best in the business. And, distillers don't just grow on trees. So when we were able to pull him out of retirement, bring him out to Wyoming, we wanted him to basically mimic what happened at Makers. We wanted to make a wheated bourbon, and we wanted to do it like Makers did in general, but greatly downsized. And so for the first 4 years we were rotating, but there's some problems with that, or there's a problem with that. A third of your warehouse is usually empty because you're going to be taking a third of the stock and moving it every couple of years, and then you move it around. And so you can't maximize the storage capacity of your warehouses. So that's number one. Number two, when you rotate your stock, you are trying to create the most consistent flavor profile in all of your barrels that you can, because you're making one product. And that's what Makers had done for a very long time. We started off that way, but then we quickly realized we wanted to start doing other things, hence the Outrider story, et cetera. And so when Steve got homesick and it was time to go home and back to Kentucky, and we brought in Nancy Fraley, Nancy said, no more rotation, leave it where it lays, and we will identify barrels for blending, and I will get a consistency for our small batch product. But the fun part of maturation is you find these sweet spots, or these honey pots in the warehouse, like the northeast corner of warehouse A, for some reason, about midway up to high, is producing great barrels for us. And that's fun. You know, you get to find a single barrel in there every now and then, maybe a barrel strength. And thanks to our current GM, Jason, who is really doing all of the I guess you could say, the record keeping and doing, we've never been that great at record keeping until the last couple of years. We will now be able to say, okay, we're going to try to focus on that part of the warehouse to make single barrel moving on. So now it's the fun part. You know, the lower part of the warehouse generates one flavor profile, the top a different, and just for some reason in certain spots in these warehouses, it will produce fantastic whiskeys.
Excellent. And I know you talked about a couple different things, so I just want to hit on what Wyoming whiskey puts out on a regular basis. You have small batch, which is our house whiskey, our house bourbon, what all of our cocktails are made with. That's readily available as long as you have glass. You have single barrel, which comes out once, maybe twice a year, correct?
Yep.
That's at 96 proof.
Correct.
You have Outrider, which we're tasting today for the first time. That's at 100. You have barrel strength, which is, I'm assuming, at barrel strength, and it changes based upon the barrel. And those are the ones that are, am I missing anything that's distributed outside of Wyoming?
Double cask is the only other product that's somewhat regularly available. That's developed a cult following recently, and we're going to start our output of that, and we're going to up that a little bit because it definitely has a following and makes for a damn good Manhattan.
Yeah, and that's finished in sherry casks, correct? Or is it? Yes. Yeah.
Yep. Pedro Jimenez sherry casks.
Right, and that's not currently not in Maine, but Herb will work on that when the time is appropriate to do.
In the spring. In the spring.
I'm just gonna jump in here. So we have the poll results if you want to go over that, and we have
I'd love to.
that I wanted to pose. So we had 21 of our attendees, so 54% answer 1,350 bottles.
Excellent, which is the correct answer. And I'll tell you what's fun about that, Aisha. Thanks for leading me into this. Herb shared with me earlier, because we got those notes from him on the bottle count today. He said that it is going to be a neck-to-neck race over the last month and a half, 2 months, to see what state in New England has the most sales of Wyoming whiskey between Maine and Massachusetts. Well, Massachusetts isn't a state, it's a commonwealth, but for this thing, it'll be the same. So, so that's good job on supporting the brand throughout the state. We don't know the number for exact, but I'm going to bet that most of those bottles come out of Stompers, because I know, based upon the conversations I've had on the floor, most people have it in their home bar. And you know, we pour quite a bit here at the restaurant too. So, so that's nice. 1,350. That hopefully that makes you happy, David. That
very much so. And I like how you're encouraging heavy consumption through the end of the year.
Well, only consumption of Wyoming whiskey. I think what people should do is like put away their other options and just focus on a singular brand, because I'm not a big fan of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We should be better at them in something else besides everything we're already better at them in. It's also a good chance for me to remind everyone that University of Maine football beat UMass this weekend, which is the 5th FBS team that Maine has beaten in their history. So that's a good effort right there.
That's fantastic.
How long do we have to listen to this?
At least another 45 minutes.
On that note, I'm going to jump back in. David, there's a question for you in the chat from Allison Dowdy. She is wondering what percentage is considered barrel strength.
Each barrel is going to end up at a different ABV or proof. And I'll speak in proof for a moment, because that's what we normally are speaking about. Our barrel strength products have varied from 116 to 126, I believe. We had a 120 in there, we had a 124, we had a 126. So that's what it's generally coming out of the barrel at. And then we use reverse osmosis water that has been stripped of everything in order to bring that down to the proof points for the different products that we were just talking about. But the barrel strength product remains at the full strength. And there's one hallmark of our whiskeys that I think I could stand behind all day, and that is none of our products drink to proof. So when you pick up an Outrider at 100 proof or 50 ABV, it doesn't drink to that proof. You would never guess it's at 100 proof. Same thing for double cask, same thing for our single barrel, same thing for anything that we put out. And so if you've ever had a Booker's, which I think is at around 126 or 127, that's hot. I mean, that burns you. Your lips numb, and everything about that is just hot. If you were to put that next to one of ours at 126, it would be vastly different. And I cannot put my finger on what it is about our process that causes that mildness of the high proof, but it occurs. And that's something that we've seen develop over the years.
I've got to think in my uneducated, I've never distilled. I've never been in charge of aging or worked in a rick house. But I remember when I was out there with you in late August, I was looking through some pictures, and just about every picture I had in the morning, I was wearing my puff nano jacket. And then in the afternoon, same place, I'm in shorts and a t-shirt. You had even in August, you were getting those big temperature swings. And if you're getting those for multiple months, we don't get those in Maine. I'm not wearing my puff nano jacket in Maine in that time, and I think I've got to think those big temperature swings are getting a more play with that wood and that's what I would assume.
Obviously there are a number of factors and forces that play into a flavor profile and to the mellowing of a whiskey. I wouldn't doubt if that's part of it. I've always wondered, for about 6 months out of the year, there is no maturation happening in our barrels, because as soon as a barrel drops below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, goes into hibernation. There's nothing dynamic about what's happening in that barrel anymore. Yeah. And I've always wanted to assign something to that cold. And who knows, maybe that super cold all winter long does something to that. But I don't know.
Yeah.
It would all be.
So what do you say we jump into Outrider? Is that
great?
I think everyone should have a 2-ounce pour of Outrider. And if we can get those, so this is, I think I said it earlier, David, this is my favorite thing that you do. I'm a huge fan of this. And then when you told me the story out there in August about this, I even fell in love with it even more because the story is so great. So I'm really excited to share this with everybody. But if you don't mind, I know you probably tell the story 20 times a week, but if you don't mind just sharing the story of how Outrider happened and why it continues to happen.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, Steve Nally came from Maker's Mark, and that's an important fact or thing to remember in the story, because Maker's makes a wheated bourbon. That's all they do. He did that for 33 years, ended up as their master distiller, et cetera. We started production, as I said, on July 4th of 2009, and we were making a wheated bourbon. It was not long after that one of the many tasks that I had with the company was to keep my finger on the pulse of the industry and, see what people were doing. What are they drinking? What are they liking? And I saw a little blip on the radar that rye was emerging from the swamp and it was actually becoming something that people were drinking again. Because rye had really been cast away as swill for so long. And so I approached Steve and I suggested that we make a rye. And Steve's immediate response was, "I don't want to make a rye." And I said, "Well, why not?" And he said, quote, "Rye sucks," end quote. And I said, "Well, it really doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what I think, but America's starting to drink it. And if we're going to make it, we're going to have to plant our rye. We're going to have to, go through the whole process, and it's going to be 6 years before we have it." He goes, "I don't care. I don't want to make rye." So seeing the adversity, I did what any smart person in my position would do. I went to my partner and ultimate boss, Brad Mead, and I convinced him that it was a good idea and had him tell Steve that we were going to make rye. Steve was none too happy about this. In fact, he was pissed. he let me know it every time I talked to him. And then the day finally came where he started making it, which was in November of 2011. And he chose that time frame because at the end of every year, calendar year, he would clean the still. And he was convinced that by using rye in our process, it was going to foul the system, completely ruin everything. And so he was gonna have to clean it. He was very dramatic about all of this stuff. And one of these days, I want him to be listening to this story and have him, he should have the ability to jump in because I'd love to hear his take on these components. But this is all true from where I sit. He called me on day one. I'll spare you the language, but anybody who has ever worked with rye will tell you it's a difficult grain to work with because it's very foamy during the fermentation process. And day one, the fermenters overflowed. And he called me and he said, I told you this was a bad idea. It smells like blank in here. Goes on. And I said, Steve, come on, figure it out. You're in the Bourbon Hall of Fame and you've got a great Rolodex, figure it out. So he did. He made 100 barrels of rye, and the quotes are important. And then he made 200 barrels of bourbon made with rye. It was so difficult to get him to do this. And he let me hear about it every time I saw him. I never asked him to do it again. A few years later, he, as I had said earlier, returned to Kentucky. Family was calling him home. Donna was ready to go. And so when we had our new distiller, Sam, and we brought in Nancy Fraley, who is a person who plays a pivotal role in the development of Wyoming whiskey, I asked them to try some of the barrels that Steve had made, the rye and the bourbon. Nancy reported back that it was some of the best young rye that she had ever tried. And I was shocked. It's not what I was expecting. I thought it was gonna be terrible. Same with the bourbon. So at that point, it was 3 years old. I said, well, we'll keep an eye on it. So the next year when she came out, she tried it again. She says, David, I think this rye is ready. And as some of you may know, rye can be sold at a younger age than bourbon. It matures more quickly. And I said, well, we're not going to release it at 4. We're going to wait till 5. Everything that we're releasing is at 5 years now. This will give us a year to come up with a name, a marketing strategy, its label, etc. So I called Sam a couple days later and I asked him for the mash bill of the rye. He said, you're not going to believe this. It's only 48% rye. And I said, you got to be wrong, man. I do the math again because I've done it 6 times. You want me to tell you it's a rye? Can't do that. One thing about the Mead family is they're brutally honest. There's no hiding, there's no lying, there's no nothing, straight up. So I panicked and I called Brad. I told him the situation, and we just couldn't believe, how could he have made that mistake? So it now falls into the very unsexy category of straight American whiskey or American straight whiskey. And the beauty of that is the guardrails are widened. It's a very broad category. And it was what we had on hand was so good that we now could do a little bit with it. We could stretch the soup, so to speak. And what was decided between Brad, Sam, Nancy, and I was we would do a blend of the bourbon made with rye with the almost rye, we started calling it. And so at that point, it was a 2-to-1 ratio of bourbon to rye. It was a 66 barrel blend in the first year. And we were having a really hard time naming it. I had suggested we call it the Bastard Batch, which Kate immediately put her foot down and said, over my dead body, are we putting a curse word on our label? And she was right, 100%. But no suggestions were being offered by Brad or Kate or anybody else in the company. So falling back on me, I needed some inspiration because I was just hitting a wall. I thought of awry, the word awry, which was already claimed by a Colorado distillery. I mean, there was a bunch of them. So I called Steve for inspiration, and I had asked him, we hadn't talked probably 2 years. So we caught up, we laughed about some stuff. And then finally I got around to the point at hand. And I said, hey man, I want you to know that rye you made is spectacular. And he said, good, I'm really happy for you. And I said, but man, we're having a hell of a time naming it. Why'd you only use 48% rye? And he said, because I told you, I didn't want to make rye. And I couldn't believe that such a nice Southern gentleman like Steve would do that intentionally. And I hung up the phone not long after that, and I called Brad and told him, and Brad could not believe it either. I mean, it was shocking that he did that. So I wanted to call it Defiance, which I thought would have been a perfect name for it, but there was already a Defiant whiskey out there, as some of you may know. So Brad actually came up with the name Outrider. And I didn't mention this before, but Brad's a 4th generation Wyoming cattle rancher. He grew up on the ranch. He's moved tens of thousands of head of cattle over the years. And he decided that Outrider would be the right name for it, because outriders are the riders on the flanks of a herd that keep the strays in, keep it back with the herd. And these barrels were somewhat looked at as being strays. And it also gave us the opportunity to use the letter Y in outrider to suggest rye without saying rye, because there's all sorts of regulations around that. And so that's how we landed on Outrider. And there's the story.
It's one of the best stories, and it keeps getting better every time I hear it. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. A couple questions came in. One is this bottled in bond coming out, which leads us to that whole
Sure.
as well.
So up and until this year, yes, it had been bottled in bond. We were taking small portions of that stock that was made in 2011 and bottling it. And each year we would do a different label. And it was fun to just come up. It was the same color palette, but we would change it up a little bit. There would be a white double W the first year, it'd be a green double W the next year, it would be white, whatever. And then this year, as you can see here, we came up with a much darker green label. We put foil in it. And I think this is really the richest and my favorite label of all of them. But what sets this year's blend apart is we're basically out, we're almost out of our 2011 stock. And originally we had thought we would just let Outrider ride into the sunset, so to speak, but there was so much uptake on it. Our partners at Edrington believed in this product considerably, and as did we. I mean, it got quite a following. And so about 5 years ago, we started making the ingredients for this again. This time around, we made it with 51% rye as opposed to 48, which would give us the flexibility of releasing an actual rye someday if we choose to do that. But what we did this year is we took the almost 10-year-old stock and blended it with our younger 5-year, dumped it in steel back in March, I believe, let it marry, and then we put it back into the barrels from which they came. Same thing with the bourbon. We made both of those ingredients, or made that ingredient again, old and younger, let that marry, put it back in the barrels. And as Nancy says, the older stock teaches the younger stock how to be more mature. I know that sounds silly, but there is some chemical background to that. It actually does help with it. So it got a full summer season of aging after the marrying. And then we put all of that together in late August, early September of this year to make this year's product. So because we use products from 2 different distilling seasons made by 2 different distillers, it no longer qualifies as a bonded product.
And you told us previous to this call, you're hopeful to get back to bottled in bond at some point in the future?
It has its pros and cons. And the pros is you get to say bonded. And I know that bonded is a very important word to a number of whiskey consumers because it speaks volumes to the provenance and the, what is in the bottle. And we've liked that being a bonded product of ours. But when you're bonded, you can only use barrels from 1 distilling season. And sometimes you like to have the flexibility of pulling from maybe a year older and a year younger in order to make a batch that is the best that it can possibly be. And Nancy is, anything I say about her is going to be an understatement, but she's so skilled at what she does that I think she would probably prefer to have that flexibility so that she could go in different years. Whether or not we decide to do that remains to be seen. We'll be doing this process for at least 1 more year.
Okay. Excellent. There another question came in that I'm getting on a text is, because you have barrels of rye, are you going to do a rye, or are you thinking just using that rye for Outrider? I think I'm asking that question right.
Yep. At this point, we don't have any plans of releasing a rye. Do I think that sometime in the future, Wyoming Whiskey will release a small batch rye? Probably. I would encourage everybody on this call to keep their eyes open. In about a year from now, there's going to be a 10-year anniversary bourbon that we're going to be releasing that Herb better fight hard for Maine, because you've done such a good job for us. That's going to be an interesting product. It's not going to be a rye, but it's going to be something unlike you've ever seen from us before. This is all speculation. I would think in a few years, we would probably take a hard look at whether or not we wanted to release a small batch rye that would be on the same level as our flagship small batch bourbon.
Yeah.
And once it gets older, once we have aged barrels, we're seeing some amazing things happen. So you never know what might happen next.
And when you say when you were telling the story about getting in, you said you had to plan ahead because you had to plant the rye. Every ingredient that's going into your bottles, that is a Wyoming grown or Wyoming nurtured ingredient. Like I'm saying nurtured for the water, but everything is a Wyoming. Like you were telling me the story that the farmer that grows your grain and brings everything over and everything else. And I love that personally, because that's very much what we do in our house, in our bistro. We know when we have oysters, we know we get them from Joanna. We know who's doing it. So
our grain grower's name is Brent. He is a great human being. I had dinner with him 2 nights ago. I actually do an annual pheasant hunting trip up to the farm, and Brent always swings by and shares a whiskey or two with us and some dinner. And he's a fantastic human being. We have a great relationship with him. He grows all of our corn, wheat, rye, and he's grown barley as well, continues to grow barley for us, ships it up to Montana where the closest malting facility is. And that's the only ingredient, with full disclosure here, that I can't say all of the grain is Wyoming grown, because there's undoubtedly going to be some Montana barley that is blended in with the Wyoming barley during the malting process. There's been talk of a malting house being built not very far from our distillery at all. If that ever happens, we would probably shift to that so that we could say every kernel, every grain that goes into the bottle is from Wyoming. But at this point, % barley that's going into the bottle, I'd say it's half and half between Montana grain, Wyoming, and there's nothing wrong with Montana. It's a good state.
yeah, it's not like the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
No, it's nothing like it at all.
No, it's solid. I had a question that came in that was for me for the pear and sage simple syrup, the recipe. So if I can just jump in real quick and give that, and then we'll jump back to the fun part. So instead of using water, I actually used a can of pears from the grocery store, halved pears in 100% juice, not the syrup. Dumped the pears and the syrup into a saucepan, added 14 ounces of simple syrup, which equates to the big can of juice, some sage. For sugar, I used brown sugar, not white sugar, half a cinnamon stick, some allspice, a pinch of salt, simmered that until it diluted, threw in some sage, let it go for about 5 to 7 minutes, cooled it down, strained out the pears, and that's your sage and pear simple syrup. I'll put that in writing. I'll get that to Aisha, and we can drop that into an email to everybody as well. If you have the time to make it at home, feel free. It's delicious. And as a free bartending advice for this, if you're ever working with tree fruit, pears, apples, not necessarily oranges, but any of those other tree fruits, I like to use brown sugar instead of white sugar. It gives it more of a round flavor to it. So just my unsolicited bartending advice. Your puppy must be happy after bird hunting with you for the weekend, huh, David?
He's tired in a good way. He performed
great.
admirably, and yeah, very happy with it. He's at 9 years old now, and he still acts like a puppy when he hits the field.
That's great. Terrific. So I don't know if people have been sipping along with us on this. David, you and I have had a lot of conversations about rye and Outrider and everything else. And I'm on record of saying I switched to rye right around this season, right around Thanksgiving. I start drinking far more rye than I do bourbon. And I'm so glad that Outrider's here, because I had one bottle that basically lasted me for 6 months, and now I can be a little bit more sharing and consume quite a bit more. So I'm happy about that. But I love this because it has all the rye notes and that pepper and the spice and everything else, and it just finishes without the second burn or the second spice to it. And I guess that also goes into you talking about how it doesn't drink to proof. Like, this is 100 proof, and I feel like this could be my everyday sipper and be very content with that.
There's a couple things about it that I like. Number one, it's a bridge. It's a kind of a perfect bridge between a rye and a bourbon, because when you do the math on it, it's about 27 to 29% rye, which isn't a lot of rye. A lot of these ryes that are on the market, you'll see them 95% rye. And when you sip that, it just explodes in your face. That spice just, it kills, doesn't kill you, but some people love that. I personally don't, but I like the hints of the spice that you get with this, but I also like the smooth, and I know smooth is an overused word in the industry, but the bourbon finish of it. It doesn't have that second spice like you're talking about. And it'll hold up in any cocktail that you want to put it in. This is of all of our products, I would say this and our double cask, which obviously has a secondary maturation to it, there's so much more to it. There's so much more depth and length to those products that I would put it in any cocktail. I would put it over a cube, I would serve it neat, whatever. And I'm just so happy with how this turned out, because you never could have designed this ever, by Steve doing what he did and forcing us to blend it with a bourbon and whatnot. Never would no one in any conference room would say, all right, here's what we're going to do.
Right.
And so necessity being the mother of invention, this is what we came up with. And thank God it turned out fantastic. And I love it.
Except now there's probably some conference rooms in Kentucky where they're saying what we have to do is what they're doing in Wyoming with their Outrider. How do we make that happen? Because this is delicious and amazing. And
well, I'd be flattered if they were doing that.
And I'll tell you, you were saying like in a cocktail, I think the only thing I would make with this is a very, very simple old fashioned. Like I would even hesitate to do a Manhattan or a Boulevard Day with it, because I feel like you're going to end up hiding so many of the notes and so many of that flavor profile. Just a 1/4 ounce of sugar and a little stir of dilution and some Allen Whale bitters, only Allen Whale bitters, as we say all the time. It's it's just something to enhance it and brighten it instead of trying to disguise it.
It's a fantastic sipping whiskey. I absolutely love it. And I love the fact, I love having been involved with it as much as I was, but at the end of the day, credit goes to Steve for what he made here. He didn't sandbag it. He didn't intentionally tank this. He made the best that he could make. And as a result, we've benefited from it. So it really is hats off to Steve, despite his defiance.
Perfect. So I would love to hear in the chat what other people think of this as we get into to talk about a little bit about our trip out that we got to hang out with David and Herb out in Wyoming at in late August.
And while people are sharing their thoughts, we do have a couple of questions that came in if you want to address those, Bob.
Yeah.
One of them asks, some of the larger distilleries have moved away from laying the barrels down during the storage. Are there more modern techniques of production and storage that you think work better than traditional techniques?
If you're asking me that question, there's a tried and true way of making great American whiskey. And that's in full-sized 53-gallon new charred white oak barrels. We make a traditional bourbon in a non-traditional place. Beyond that, we have not deviated from how it has been done for a very long time. yes, there are different ways of storing barrels. Some are palletized. You put 4 barrels on a pallet, standing them up, and there's some argument that you're getting that head is going to affect it some more. I don't know the exact science or the reasoning behind why people do that. It might be because they're packing more barrels into a smaller space. But the way that we do it on traditional ricks, there's a lot more air circulation that moves around the barrels. Even the lowest rick, we have 1 foot of depth below the lowest barrel that allows the air to circulate around it. And I don't know if that happens when you stand it up. There's also ways of maturing whiskey in small barrels, as small as 5 liters, in order to accelerate you can impart flavor into a whiskey more quickly with a small barrel, but you can't cheat time. You can't create a bourbon or whiskey that is going to have the same mellowness, the same depth that you're going to get from a full-size barrel that ages over time. Flavor, yes, you do get flavor more quickly. And I've heard crazy things about them having big subwoofers in warehouses that sonically help stimulate the interaction of the alcohol with the wood. Does that work? I have no idea. There's lattice work of charred staves that you could put within barrels. Makers does that with their Makers 46. Does that add flavor? Without question. But does it speed the maturation process in terms of the mellowness and the overall excellence of the product? From what I've been told, no, it doesn't. So I could kind of speculate on this for a while, but that's the shorter answer.
I saw a question come in from Ed Curtis here. Aish, I don't know if you're reading the same one. Does it really make a difference of letting the bourbon or the whiskey breathe a little bit? And this is coming, I believe, Eddie, from when I was asking people to open up their bottles and or their tasting and pour them into glasses before, as we start talking, to open it up. And Jake, I think this would, I see my friend Jake is on the call, co-host of the Bourbon Lens, who I often will default on tasting and everything else on. So Jake, if you disagree with me or jump in on this, I think by letting, especially on the higher proof bourbons, getting them into a glass and letting them opening up and letting them breathe a little bit is a great way, just for the oils and the flavors to sit in the glass. So when I do my first nosing and my first taste, it's already settled in, if that makes any type of sense. Jake, am I wrong, or is this something that you don't have an opinion on or have an opinion on?
I do have an opinion on it, actually. I have changed over the time. I was, just a pour guy, just like get it out and pour it. But oxidation helps whiskey a ton. It opens up all the flavor profiles. And we had Jay Ayersman on from New Riff, and he changed the way I even think about whiskey in general, because he was like, don't be scared to add water. Especially on higher proof that can stand that. All the oils will in a big whiskey will just kind of sit there. But the moment you drop water, like just a little drop, dip your finger into a glass and just kind of sprinkle it in there, those oils will separate. It'll produce different aromas, different flavors, and allow for a more successful and tasteful pour, in my opinion. So don't be scared of water, and drink whiskey how you want to drink it. I think that's the big thing. There's no wrong way to drink whiskey.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
100% agree with everything he just said. I just handed Billy, my father-in-law, who most of you have met, is sitting right off camera, and I just handed him our pours of this. And then I made a glass with water, ice, and a spoon, just so we can move a little bit of ice and move a little water into Billy Overboard. It comes in, I mean, it's 123 proof. It, like David said earlier, it doesn't drink to 123, but at the end of the day it is. So you should respect it. And 2, it's nice to get all the full flavors from it. Aisha, I'll let you, there's some long things in there. I'll let you sift through that, so I'm not reading. Okay. So real quickly, and thank you, Jake, for that. And if you haven't listened to Bourbon Lens podcast, it's available on iTunes and everywhere else you listen to your podcasts on. There's some great ones that he's had. Go sift through the library. They're all wonderful. Give him a 5-star review. And in a few,
What a shout out, Bob. What a
yeah,
shout
I'm here.
out.
I'm here for you. And in a few weeks, I believe, or however long that weeks turn into, David is going to be one of your guests for a conversation.
Yeah, so we have this week's episode featuring Luca Mariano, and then we have our 150th, and then it will be Talon. We have two more, so two more before David, but it was a great guest. He was gracious enough after a stomach bug to come hang out with us. So a wealth of knowledge and a ton of fun. So thank you, Wyoming Whiskey and David, for hanging out with us.
Awesome. I'll make sure we post that on all of our platforms as well, so people know, and we can make sure there's a strong contingency of Maine listening to that podcast, and at least one more than in Massachusetts. We'll make, if you get me the numbers, I'll force that. Okay. So real quickly, let's switch over to Billy Overboard. In Billy Overboard, this barrel was selected by Billy McKechnie, my father-in-law, and when we went to visit David and the Wyoming Whiskey team in late August of this past summer. And I got to tell you, I think Maine is the most beautiful state I've ever lived in, but Wyoming is breathtaking and such amazing landscapes, and it's terrific. I like numbers. I like statistics. The state is 3 times the land mass of Maine, with less than half of the population of Maine, and that to me is just phenomenal. There's so much open area and there's so much open air, and it was terrific. So real quickly, I just want to give everyone kind of like an overview of what we did when we were in Wyoming. I have a quick trivia question, and we'll jump right into Billy Overboard. So we flew in on a Saturday. Thank you, Courtney and Aisha, for taking care of the restaurant while I was away. Flew in on a Saturday. David picked us up. David, I'm going blank on the name of the drink. They're like little ices. David sloshies. David greets us at the airport in Jackson, and they make these whiskey sloshies at all the package stores, and it was just the most perfect way to get off a plane and transition right to a road trip. We drove down about 2 hours or so to a little town with a cowboy bar. Had some great barbecue, some small batch. Billy and a few of the guys were drinking Coors Light banquet grenades, is what I like to think about. Haven't seen those since I was in high school, so it was kind of fun to see those. And then stayed that night at a hunting and fishing camp. The next morning, woke up, had an amazing breakfast, and went fishing. For me, this is where the trip took a turn. Like just right off the bat, let's just take a quick turn. When they talk about elevation of Wyoming and everything else, it's a serious thing. And a lot of these pictures that you're looking at right now, I was very sick. It was the elevation change was something to reckon with, that's for sure. But an absolutely amazing time. Next day, we after a day of fishing, we went to the distillery the following day and did our barrel picks. David and his team did an amazing job. I think we had 12 barrels that we tasted while we were there. Ended up picking this barrel here that we're enjoying, and then a second barrel that we're going to be releasing in May. And then after that, David drove us about 5 hours home the long way back to Jackson, going through Yellowstone Park and Cody, Wyoming, getting back to Jackson. Then the following day went fishing again, had a great time, didn't get sick. That was excellent. And that's where Billy Overboard came into play. If you've been fly fishing, it's important when you fish to communicate and to stay in the boat. And my father-in-law did neither one of those effectively while fishing the Snake River through the Tetons. So as Jeff from Stompers is on the call, and Billy were in a boat together with one of the best guides, if not the best guide in Wyoming, who has won multiple championships, both as a guide and a fisherman. So I said, like, Jeff is the best fisherman out of us, except for David, out of the people that came from Maine and Herb, who came from Massachusetts. Let's put Jeff with the best guide, and let's put Billy so he can learn to be a better fisherman in the boat and send them off. Herb and I will ride with David. We'll have, the most fun out of the two boats. And we did. We'll come back to that. But as we're going down, we see Billy and Jeff and Murph off to the side. We come down. Murph is just shaking his head. Billy is laughing. What happened was their lines got crossed, their fishing lines got crossed. And when Murph said, Billy, bring me the tip of your rod so I can untangle it, instead of just taking his rod from his left hand, putting in his right hand and going like this to bring the tip of the rod to Murph, Billy took several steps backwards, trying to bring the tip of the rod this way. The boat is not a large boat. And here goes Billy, rod, gear, feet, everything straight out of the boat. Jeff will tell the story that it was class 3 rapids at a turn. Billy pops right up, great athlete, and wearing a life vest, thank God. Throws the rod back in the boat. Thank you, Billy, for throwing it back in the boat, because that wasn't our rod. We were using Murphy's. Throws it back in the boat, holds on. The whole time, Murphy's thinking he's probably dead. He's been guiding for 28 years, never had anyone fall off the boat. Not a single person. I'm sure there's a lot of people that were probably drinking, were probably doing other things. Everyone managed to stay in the boat, not Billy. They had to have him go down the river while holding on to the side of the boat until they can get to a place to safely pull over to get him back in the boat. So we had a different name for this barrel going into that. And then afterwards, I was like, nope, it has to be Billy Overboard. Because if my father-in-law can fall out of a boat more or less sober while fishing, and then some of the most beautiful water with beautiful scenery in the world, should have a name of Billy Overboard. So cheers. Backpedaling a little bit, before I went, I had sent David a long text message of, this is what I'm looking for in barrels. And then about 20 minutes later, I sent another message being like, just forget all of that. Everything that you guys do, I'm in love with, and I'm happy with. So don't pay attention to anything that I just said. So this barrel was actually the first barrel that we selected out of the two. And as soon as we tasted it, I was like, yes, this has to be one of them. It is on the nose, it's a lot of nutmeg and baking spices. Annie smelled it yesterday when I was doing my homework with it, and she's like, oh my God, I want that. It smells like Christmas. Being 24 weeks pregnant, she had none of it, but she immediately was associated those two. And remember, think about this, 123 proof, but when you take your first sips, it doesn't, going back to what David said, it does not drink at all like 123. And the reason why I use that pear and the sage is it finishes with orange and a little bit of pear to it. So adding a little bit of water, adding a little ice brings a lot of that stuff out. But I think this is going to be amazing this winter season. And I think it's a great pick. And David, thank you for parting ways with us, not using it for something else, because this is a
But
true
we had,
treasure.
I would like to say to everybody that we had a pretty good lineup of barrels to choose from. And this barrel definitely emerged as a selection. I mean, there's no question. And this is the type of barrel that could have qualified for our single barrel program, which is our brown label. The excellence of this barrel is, it can't be overstated. I mean, this is a great barrel of whiskey. I don't know, Herb, if I'm supposed to be saying this or not, but I'm going to say it. You'll deal with the fallout. But we were allocated 2 barrels that day to select, and we were joking about how you never want to be the first or the last in anything when it comes to sampling things. And we had selected 2 barrels, and we were very happy with those 2 barrels. And we got to the final barrel, and I can't remember which of you said, yeah, we got to at least try it. I mean, it's cursed, but there's no way. And the last barrel turned out to be outstanding, like as good as this one, just different, obviously, with its flavor profile. And I had to actually get some clearance from my team to make sure that I could allocate 3 barrels to Maine, which that sounds silly because, Maine, not a huge market for us normally. Now, because of Bob, it is a good market. The fact that it's toe to toe with Massachusetts right now is unbelievable. Never would have guessed that. So there's going to be a second barrel going to Bob, and Jeff at Stompers is going to be getting a barrel as well in the spring. And each and every one of these is exceptional in its own way. Something about the single barrel program that I think is important to note is, the private stock program is, each barrel is selected for excellence to be in the program, to be a potential pick. But each barrel has different flavor profiles, and each account, like Bob's, they're looking for something in particular, and they'll find that flavor profile in one of the samples that we provide, hopefully. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes they say, no, we're looking for something super spicy, and that's just not us or whatnot. But that day, we had an outstanding lineup of barrels. And when we tasted that last barrel, I was like, oh, I'm in trouble. I'm going to have to get a little exception here so that we could send 3 barrels to Maine when not many other accounts were getting even 1. So
I'm still trying. I'm still trying to explain to them how Maine is getting 3 barrels. And actually, just for clarification, this is the only barrel right now in all 6 New England states. We didn't have quite the output of barrels as David could speak about in the barrel program. So we had to cut back, and Massachusetts is not getting any barrels. Rhode Island, Connecticut, not getting any barrels. Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Vermont, not getting any barrels. Pennsylvania got 1 beginning of last year. That's it. So we are very fortunate. David, obviously very appreciative, but every time I see the people running the numbers, I'm like, don't forget, I got 2 more. And they go, well, yes, but Novio's has got their barrel. I said, yeah, but Novio's is getting another one. So,
well, I'm looking forward to being there for Derby Day next spring. Little quick snippet about me and my family growing up. We lived in Louisville, Kentucky for 7 years, and I actually went to 2 different derbies, picked the winning horse, Swale and Spend a Buck. I had no idea how I picked those, but I remember winning $100 and thinking I was the richest person in the world. And I'm very much looking forward to getting back to Maine because my family, my dad, my mom, and my sister Heather, we would go to Boothbay Harbor, and that was our summer. We'd go there for 2 weeks in August, and I remember great memories of Boothbay, and I'm very much looking forward to being there for Derby. My parents are going to come over. If any of you folks could come and join us for this event, I'd love to introduce you to them. And I'm psyched to get back to Maine.
So I think that's a great segue to announce our Kentucky Derby party. Was
I not supposed to say that?
That's fine. You can say whatever you want. It's your call. Aisha, if you could throw up the image, we are announcing the return of the Kentucky Derby to the Bistro. If you have been to one of our Kentucky Derby events in the past, they are a ton of fun. We closed the restaurant down completely. We moved the TV. We moved the tables out. We bring in TVs since we don't normally have TVs, and we're gonna run a Kentucky Derby live stream it. I believe it's from 3 to 8 o'clock. Is the party. Dress to impress. Wear all your hats, and we'll give out some prizes and such. And then David, I didn't even get a chance to talk to you about this in the pre-call, but my good friend Gene, who has Nocturnum Draft House right down the road, is going to have a band that night that's going to start at 8:30. And he is going to be bringing in Wyoming whiskey, and he is going to be pouring some cocktails for us and everything else to keep the theme going until
Awesome.
1 a.m. So we're going to have live music at Nocturnum. We're going to have the race here at the Bistro. That will be coming. That you can buy your tickets now. There's only 45 couples that we admit because everyone's been to the Bistro. It's small. We don't want to overload the place and make it uncomfortable. And 45 couples is plenty. And there'll be a lot of oysters. There'll be caviar. There will be lamb. There's going to be a great menu coming out as well as some great cocktails. Before we do that, I'm jumping around a little bit on this slide here. Before we do that, on Monday, May 3rd, will be the release party for our next barrel. That barrel is called Derby Day 2022. And that will be the Monday prior to the Derby. David will not be on that call with us because David's going to be in New York City doing some time in Big Apple. But what we're going to do is we're going to kind of change up the call a little bit, and we're going to talk about how to make cocktails for the Derby and how to make cocktails with high proof bourbon. And we're going to kind of embrace that barrel. That barrel was picked especially for the Derby. It has more mint, it has more grass, it has all the flavors to work with a mint julep. So I'm super excited about that. Completely different than Billy Overboard. Billy Overboard to me is a winter sipper. That cocktail is going to be a high proof cocktail that's going to be so much fun for Derby Day, and I'm excited for that. And then something that we're also very excited about, on the 17th of this month, the Bistro turns 5. A very, very fast 5 years. And I looked across, and actually I was looking to verify the date and verify everything else. And the best way to do that is through Open Table. And when I went back, Billy was actually the first person to eat in the restaurant. So that was kind of fun that my in-laws were the first people to eat with us on November 17th, 5 years ago. So what we're going to be doing, a lot of times when people turn 5 or they turn 10 or anytime they have an anniversary, they do a, hey, come in and celebrate. We're going to give you a discount. We're going to do something. We're going to do something special and everything else. As a team, we decided we're going to continue doing what we do well. We're going to make quality food, quality cocktails, and just roll out exactly what we do with a couple special menu items this week. But other than that, it's going to be what we do. And what we're going to do in exchange, hopefully you support us, we're going to give 10% of every dollar that comes in. Gift cards, event registrations for the 2 Derby events, anything that we do for the next 7 days, we're going to give 10% of that to the World Central Kitchen. I believe on the call right now, maybe is Fiona. Aisha, I probably need your help a little bit with this. Or Josh.
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Hi, Fiona. How are you?
I'm good. This has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Did you get your kit?
I did. I'm
Good.
enjoying it tremendously.
And I know when you were in the Bistro, oh, I'm sorry, Fiona, I'm going to back up and introduce you real quick. Fiona, it works for the World Central Kitchen, but she spends a portion of her fall here in the great state of Maine, doing some work and taking some vacation, enjoying our state. And a couple of weeks ago, she dined in the Bistro. So it was great to have you and your boyfriend. I think it was your boyfriend, right? Sorry if it was your fiance or your husband. Okay, good. You're great to have you and your boyfriend in the restaurant and enjoying. I think you were introduced to Wyoming whiskey at here. So this isn't at the bistro. I think you had a couple cocktails. You had Trent Krim, my favorite.
We did. Yes.
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 Anytime you can take
delicious, as was
mezcal
the
and put it
food.
with bourbon, that's a great night. So, can you give a quick overview for those who don't know who Jose Andreas is, and I don't know who that would be on this call, or don't know who the World Central Kitchen is, and then we can kind of backwards into what we're doing with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Bob. This has been really great fun, and we're so appreciative of your support of World Central Kitchen. What we do basically is we feed people in times of crisis. So we're a disaster response organization. We respond to hurricanes, wildfires, volcanic eruptions, humanitarian crises. And we set up kitchens with a team of chefs, and we cook delicious, hot, nutritious meals, and we serve those to people in need. And so sometimes we set up our own kitchens. Other times we'll partner with local restaurants in various disaster regions and support them so they can feed people. And so we love food, and we really appreciate our restaurant partners. And it takes a lot of people to do what we all do. So that's a little bit of background about WCK.
And I'll tell you, I told you this when you were here, but I've been so amazed by the World Central Kitchen, because you see these disasters that happen around the world. And I'll use, for instance, the huge explosion that happened in Lebanon. Everything feels like a couple weeks ago, but I think it was at least a year ago that it happened. A huge, massive explosion was all over CNN and everything else. Literally within like 6 hours, I was looking at your Instagram, and you had boots on the ground and people being fed and everything else from Lebanon. And within 18 hours, I feel like Jose was there and helping and lending a hand and doing everything else. So you want to talk about an organization that not only says this is what we do and this is what we stand for, but they execute every single day what they do. And it doesn't matter if it's a hurricane, if it's a federal issue where there's, because of lost paychecks or anything else, we're setting up kitchens for federal employees, or these huge disasters that happen. World Central Kitchen always seems to be there, and always seems to be the first person there and the most organized people there. And I think you said it when you were here, and you were talking about how you think the organization goes in effect because the people working are restaurant people, and restaurant people are used to things going a little backwards, and used to the high stress, and used to everything else in weird hours. So when they're called into action, they can do it quickly. I think is that close enough to what you had said?
Exactly. Yes, we call ourselves food first responders, which is a kind of non-traditional terminology, but it really is what we do. We move fast, and we feed people, and food is something that brings people together, and so we're really happy to be able to do what we do.
So what, Fiona, what we're going to do for you in the organization is 10% of every dollar that comes in, including tip dollars and everything else, is going to be donated back to the World Central Kitchen. So we did activate a few fun things, including the Derby events, which happy to sell those out tonight. And we activated our holiday gift cards. So if you want to go in and purchase holiday gift cards, you can set it to be delivered on Christmas Eve or Hanukkah or anything else, a day of your choosing. You can pre-buy those, and 10% will go back to the World Central Kitchen, or come and dine with us. We have Outrider, we have Billy Overboard, we have McAllen 25. Come and enjoy a nice meal and a nice pour, and 10% of that will also go back to the World Central Kitchen. So a lot of different ways to give.
Hey, Bob.
Yes, sir.
So, and I didn't speak to David about this, but on behalf of Wyoming Whiskey, Edrington's going to match every dollar that you raise. We're going to match it with $1 from the good folks at Wyoming Whiskey. So we appreciate everything that you do, and certainly it's this is an awesome cause, and you know, we'd love to be a part of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Herb. And thank you, David. That's awesome.
Fiona, thank you for everything you do. That is something that many people wouldn't think about necessarily. And so thank you for all of that. That's a fantastic organization that you're with, and we're happy to be a part of it.
Wonderful.
Thank
So-
you all. We really appreciate it.
And Fiona, how much longer are you in Maine?
I'm here until the end of the month. Unfortunately, I have to go back to DC after this, but I hope to be back in Maine. I think it's the greatest state in the country. So I'm happy to be here while I can be.
Well, Josh isn't on the call, but maybe we can put some peer pressure on him to see if we can have you come back and represent World Central Kitchen for our Derby party.
Yes, I like that idea.
All right, we'll see what we can do. So and on that Derby party, David also hinted he is going to be in Maine for that Derby party. And Aisha, if you can throw up those URLs or put them in the chat, that would be awesome. That way we can get people to start thinking about coming in for that. Or not. I believe the URL for the Derby party is really difficult. It's noviosbistro.com/Derby party. And the other one I believe is Derby Day. Aisha is nodding at me. There they go. Derby party. And it's in the chat right now if you're missing that. Yep. And Derby Day. Oh, I had it right. Look at that. First time for everything. So feel free if you have any questions, as always, just reach out to me. And we'll make sure that we get you in and get it taken care of. And hopefully we'll see you this week to celebrate our birthday. We're doing a fun partnership with Wildflower Bakery. If you haven't been to them on State Street, they're going to do our desserts this week, and it's going to be little birthday cakes for dessert options to celebrate our 5th anniversary. So that's also a fun little thing to look forward to. So unless I'm missing any questions or anybody wants to chime in with anything or any questions, I'm sure Fiona can answer anything about World Central Kitchen if you're missing anything, or any other questions for David or Herb. Anyone wants to see how Aisha did on her LSATs this weekend?
We actually have one more question if we have time for it.
Sure.
There's some discussion that secondhand maturations might push the boundaries and the spirit of the law in terms of the definition of bourbons. I think most whiskey fans enjoy these products, but where is the demising wall between being a bourbon and added flavoring?
Was that question directed to Fiona or?
I think it was directed to David.
Oh, okay. All right.
Fiona, if you want to take a crack at it, have at it, but otherwise.
I could try, but I think that I would fail miserably.
Well, I can only speak on behalf of Wyoming Whiskey, and Wyoming Whiskey does not claim that our double cask is a bourbon. We follow the federal regulations in terms of labeling with it, and it's, bourbon finished in sherry casks, and that disqualifies it from being a true bourbon, because there are 6 rules of bourbon, and one of them is you cannot add any coloration or flavoring at the end of the process to change the true nature of the spirit. So if you put it into a different type of barrel other than a charred white oak barrel, that removes it from the bourbon category. Little note about Jack Daniels. Jack Daniels, for all intents and purposes, is a bourbon up and until the last minute when they burn sugar maple and have all of the sugar maple char, and they filter or they drain all of their bourbon through the sugar maple at the end, and that provides mellowness and a flavoring. That disqualifies it from being a bourbon, or else Jack Daniels would be a bourbon. So that just goes to show you how minimal the change can be to the spirit in order to disqualify it. By putting it in a sherry cask, that definitely disqualifies it. And the only thing I would say is, from a purist's perspective, no, it's not a bourbon anymore. But you know what? It's really good. And it's just something that's fun to work with. It's a different type of whiskey to work with in a cocktail. It's a great dessert whiskey. But we don't claim that it's a bourbon. We don't try to sneak that by anybody. At the end of the day, it's a secondary maturation that's adding flavor that we believe complements our base spirit.
Jake, I just saw that they asked you that same question. Do you have an opinion on that?
I mean, yeah, my opinion is that I think second-hand maturation is here to stay, because the bourbon category is fickle, right? From the nuanced perspective of not everyone likes bourbon. You know, Wyoming makers, people like that, you have a select group with sweet bourbon, right? With that wheat profile. And I think getting women into whiskey, you're going to see a lot more Pinot casks, Zinfandel cask, things like that, to try to attract different drinkers into the flavor or into the category, because it's ever expanding. But the bourbon itself can be harsh to non-bourbon drinkers if you're not used to it. So I think secondhand maturation is here to stay. I think where I draw the line is too wet of casks. You know, if you're going to finish them in wet casks that are not like full of liquid, which a lot of people are doing right now. So you have the opportunity to, distinguish yourself. But I think finished casks are here to stay, and I'm a huge fan of them. I love a good finished whiskey, especially a finished rye whiskey. I think those are phenomenal, and I think they're here to stay.
And Fiona, you agree with that as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Good. All right. So going back to these bottles that we tasted today, if you're inclined, Stompers has a very limited amount of Outrider and a limited amount of bottles of Billy Overboard that will be available tomorrow starting at 9 a.m. Jeff, is that accurate before I speak to something that I'm wrong on? Is Jeff still on? Yes. Maybe. I'm going to say yes.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I got you now, Jeff.
Yeah,
Jeff?
yeah.
Yeah.
Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. available. If anybody wants to pre-order or reserve bottles, they can email me at stompersbeverage@gmail.com and put in their wishes, and I'll do my best to fill them. I think we got about 30 bottles of Outrider and around
Not enough bottles of
84 bottles.
Yeah. I think there's more people signed up
of
for
Billy
the call.
Overboard.
There's more people signed up for the call than you have bottles of Overboard. So people are going to want to, if they're interested in a bottle, they're going to want to jump on that fairly quickly, I feel like.
If you could get your hands on a bottle of Outrider, I strongly recommend you doing it. Jeff's very kind to bring it in, and Herb's done a great job of getting it for him. Outrider is fantastic, and I will tell you that if you get a bottle of Billy Overboard, you will not be disappointed. These are two products that I would put up against anything on your home bar or anything on the shelf behind Bob's head right there. I mean, these are fantastic products.
So, David, another quick story, if people have time to hear one. I know I don't know if we're cutting into your family time or not, but this was supposed to originally be the release of Outrider in the state of Maine. And when the bottle came in, and I think Herb may have been a little surprised by this, but the level of excitement around Outrider by some other retailers was as massive as my excitement is. So they put a lot of pressure on the Martinetti as the distributor in the state. They put a lot of pressure on the manager of Martinetti to obtain some cases that were originally earmarked for Novios and Stompers. So Herb came to me, we allocated some cases out. the excitement was so much that they ended up slipping through. People jumped delivery schedules and everything else. And Southern Maine got 2 cases on Friday. Those bottles never made it to the shelf. They went to some of the top restaurants in Southern Maine. Jeff has gotten calls from other restaurants in Maine because they know that he has bottles trying to get Outrider. So that's, people are willing to travel 2 hours to get a bottle of whiskey to Stompers, because Stompers is not delivering to Portland and Augusta. It's like, that should be quite the feather in your cap, David. If Herb hasn't shared that with you, hopefully that makes you happy inside.
Very much so. And I'm gonna end this all with, I think, the best story and the best gag that's been told in a while. And that is, Herb and I were talking about some business, and we basically, Bob is he's a planner.
Aisha, end the call.
Yes. No, we're not going to end the call.
No.
Aisha, do not end the call. Bob is a planner, and Bob is looking out to May right now. Like, Bob wants to know my exact flight schedule in May, right? And I haven't looked past December yet. So when I'm talking to Herb about this, Herb's like, yeah, Bob's calling me every day. Where's the barrel? Where's the Billy Overboard barrel? And I said, you know what, we really got to gag him. We got to get him here. And so we came up with this story that the shipping truck that was bringing up Billy Overboard and a number of other products was hijacked in Connecticut. And it ended up with an accident. Like, the semi was being chased, and there was whiskey all over, like a splintered barrel all over the highway. Bob took this hook, line, and sinker, believed every word of it. He was calling his friend, who is a broadcaster in Connecticut, to find out if there was actually an accident on the highway.
Yeah, if everyone remembers Caitlin Virgil from Channel 5 News a few years ago, she's down in Connecticut now. I'm like, Caitlin, what's going on? Like, and she's like calling her friends at the state police to find out if it's been hijacked or there's an accident. Oh, Jesus.
So Herb and I Herb said, David, no, let's string this out for a little while longer. We got him. And then finally, Bob said, okay, I got to cancel all the orders for Billy Overboard. And that's the moment when we decided, okay, it's run its course. We got to tell him. And what I worry about the most is Bob has a good memory, and somehow he's going to get me and her back.
Yeah.
I don't know how, I don't know when, but somehow I'm going to walk into this and he's going to get me back, and we will probably all share this on a call sometime in the future. So
you're going to show up at the Derby party, and it's just going to be you in a big hat. That's it.
Yeah. I hope not. But thank you all.
I had to call people at the company and say, hey, listen, if you hear any talk about a truck being hijacked in Connecticut, don't worry about it. It's just a joke. We're stringing a guy along in Maine, but we had all our bases covered. We could have gone on forever.
Quick question. Brian Thiebaud had his hand up earlier, and I was wondering if he had a question that went unanswered.
No, actually, we don't know how that hand got up. Technology.
Okay. Fair enough. You guys look like very nice people, and I wanted to make sure you were not ignored.
We're having a great
we're
time.
having a
We
great
love
time.
this. Thank you, David.
Thank you for joining, and thank you everybody
Herb,
for being a part of this. I can't thank you all enough. Thank you to Jeff for carrying our product. Thanks to Herb for everything he does to punch above his weight as far as getting product into Maine. And Bob, thank you. I can't thank you enough.
With pleasure. Looking forward to
thank you.
having you here in May and celebrating the spring, hopefully, in Maine with you. That would be great.
Hey, and I'll just add, if you guys that are on this call kind of think that there's something between, David and Bob, and they're kind of getting around well together. Not till I really got out to Wyoming did I realize that they're the two, when you put two Yankee fans together for 4 or 5 days.
Oh, that's a problem.
Yeah. So, and we were, if you go back to the calendar, we were there. We're on some highway going from Cody to wherever. And I think the Yankees were on their 13 game winning streak at the time. So, I got David, of course, because there's no radio stations around there, but he's got, Sirius XM. I'm listening to Susan Waldman talk about, the next home run. And the Red Sox are giving up 4-run leads. They can't win. And the heckling, the taunting, the bullying that Billy, Jeff, and I took for those 5 days was probably not even worth the paycheck that I was receiving. I got to tell you, it was, I couldn't get out of the car because I didn't know where I was. I couldn't leave. I just had to take it. And it's fun. They kept on this literally until they were eliminated from the playoffs. And then it was radio silence from the both of them. My text chains were done. So
I was trying to get Herb to make a bet with me. And he wouldn't take the bet, but it was going to be who was going to win that last series. And if the Yankees won, he was going to have to dress up as a jockey for the Kentucky Derby party, or I was going to have to dress up as a jockey. He wouldn't take it. You could have had me dressed up as a jockey for this.
Right, exactly.
You were too much of a coward, too much of a Sox fan.
Those of you that know Bob to be a bit of a Yankee bully, let me tell you, he is matched by David DeFazio verbatim. So they're two peas in a pod.
That's the best compliment you've ever given me, Herb. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Everyone, thank you so much, unless I'm missing anything else coming in, but thank you all so much. Remember, this week, for the next 7 days, 10% goes to World Central Kitchen. Gift cards, events, and dollars spent in the restaurant to celebrate our 5th anniversary and help out their mission throughout the world. And now actually 20% because Wyoming Whiskey is going to match our donation. So please help us spread the word on that. Please purchase ahead on those events. You're going to do them anyway, so just jump in and do it. Let's have a great week and a great celebration. Everybody stay happy and healthy. And as always, if there's anything we can do for you, please let us know. Jack and I will likely be at Stompers at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. So we'll see a lot of you there to pick up your bottles. Thank you all so much.